morning. We are happy. Okay, good morning. Now we're in progress. Okay. All right. So we are doing one more overview. Now, what I found this week when we did the overview, I can't remember from years back every time we do this. I thought this week that what we would probably do is pick up there where we landed. We finished in 19 or 20, right? Last week at the end of the, hold on, we finished in 19, right? And I thought we would pick up in 20 and finish doing the rest of the overview to fill in, but no. Instead, we did another pause, but what we actually did was another I think very important part of doing an overview, and that is we took our, good morning, Susan, we took our book keywords, meaning the keywords that flow through the whole thing, right, that are not just relegated to a specific chapter, but that consistently are seen throughout the whole book. We took a look at all of those major keywords this week. So that was the majority of your work. We kind of took a little vote before we started. We decided we're not going to make lists of keywords, but if somebody has something very specific they want to see visually, just let me know, and I'm very happy to do that. But it's a little bit redundant to do that. What I think it should have happened would be you did those keyword lists on your own. And then after observing what you wrote in your list making, then you should have begun to start either having certain questions, right? Or begin to trigger connections. Also merging some of these keywords as well. How does one relate to the other? So this is it. This is what you should have been doing this week. Becoming familiar with the meanings or identifying characteristics, right, concerning each of those words. And we had, let me see if I can find my little list. It's not there. Okay. We had wrath, blood, earthquake, woe, and plagues. Okay, those 5 lists. How did you do on those list making, right? This is kind of what mine looked like right here. Just so you can see, I just put them on a Word document. I made myself 3 columns and started listing the things I saw using the verses that she gave us. Now, also, I don't know if you realized it or not, but as you got into doing those keywords, you may have found it necessary to read a little before and a little after, because sometimes those keywords, even though the word plague or wrath or blood is not in the verses that follow, the verses that follow explain what that blood topic was about or what that plague topic was about, right? So by making these lists, by learning to observe not just the one verse right where it's stated, but looking at it in its full context, and you start making lists on it, then you are beginning to identify its characteristics, kind of how it fits in the book, understanding how important each of those subjects, those 5 subjects, are to your understanding on the whole of this book. A lot of insight is gained just by making lists, believe it or not. And it seems real mechanical when you're doing it at first and when you're not real familiar with this method. But let me assure you that I cannot tell you how much worshiping I have done before God in my many years of doing this, just through list making. Because when you get done with some of these lists and you sit back and, I mean, your love for Jesus grows, your awe of what he did for you, your fear. Right now, there's a lot of things that say this should put the fear of God in you, and it certainly should. As far as your desire to bring others into faith, and also to assess your own personal relationship with God. And I'm assured, I'm really confident you all here know the Lord, but we need to help others come to that assurance of faith also. And how do you help them come to a place of peace rather than fear when they read something like Revelation, right? If they're young, if you've got young kids and they're just now learning all of this, this is one of the things that will pop up for them, because they'll start reading some of this and they get fearful and they get anxious, right? Why do you think that is? Why would you be anxious or fearful when you read through Revelation? You're not sure where you stand with God. Okay, that's one quality or part. Or what else? You might not know what else about that time frame. There's a timeline. Do you know where you fit on that timeline? If you are a believer, are you falling inside of those days of God's wrath? Or on the whole, the fullness of those 7 years that we're looking at, starting in chapter 6 all the way through 19. I mean, where are you, right? And once you study this, you're going to, I think, begin to grow assured of where we are and where we're not, right? The longer we're in this. And we're not quite there yet, but you can begin to develop those things. So you're going to understand your subjects better. You're going to see how they relate to one another. You're also going to understand the purpose for some of those words. Like, for instance, the plagues and the wrath of God. What is God's design purpose in that, right? Why is he bringing wrath? What is his wrath? When is his wrath? Right now, we're still a little conflicted, probably for most of us, as to, is the totality of what we're looking at starting with the breaking of the seals, does that begin the wrath of God, or does it more declaratively fall into a certain segment of the book? And then if that's true, then what does that mean about the rest of it? The seals and trumpets and bowls, how are they positionally and relationally to one another? How is it going to line? And I can't wait to do a timeline. I keep wanting to do that. And I keep trying to not give you too many hints about where everything lays, because I want you to see it for yourself. But I do know that the more you study this and the more that you become familiar, which is what we did this week, just by looking at these keywords and making lists, the more you're going to begin to understand the concept and the layout and the purpose and the function and how things fit and what things are in the design purpose of them. And hopefully also, as you go along, have you noticed how many times worship shows up? I did not do a segment division on worship, but I think I would love it if somebody would make a note of each time, in which chapter of the book do you see worship going on in heaven, and in relationship to the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls, where is that worship taking place, right? That would be another good, just came to me. I haven't done that either, so you won't get it this morning, but that's something to consider, okay? But I got to tell you, even this week, again, I found some more little tiny things. They're itsy bitsy, but I'm refining my own understanding too, as I go through this with you all. So I'm very excited. Okay, so once you did that, then here are some potential questions I want you to think about just off the top of your head. Oh, I've got a listen. You don't try to write them all down. I've got a list this long. Okay, it's going to be, I'm just going to throw them out and you'll get the swing of it immediately. I looked at the subject of wrath and I said, so how is wrath defined in this book, right? What are the 7 bowls of wrath and whose wrath is it? When does God's wrath come? Why does wrath come? What is its purpose, right? Woes. What is a woe? Right? How are the woes characterized? Where do they fall? What happens before? What happens after? And is their placement in the unfolding of these events significant? Is there kind of a like a signal to us of some type, right? Earthquakes, when do they occur? What happens before and after? I hope you had a chance to look at that a little bit this week. And as you made your list, that you saw what happened before and what happens after, and how might that be insightful into what you see going on, even for us when we see things like earthquakes going on today, right? Do they progressively increase or intensify, or are they generally the same? Now, we've already really kind of talked about that a couple times, but that was another question that should have been kind of addressed in your observations when you did that. Concerning the plague, what are the plagues? What is God's purpose in them? Did you notice what man's response was to them? What happened in heaven while the plagues were being poured out? Whoa, that was really profound for me. I ended up doing a whole kind of a little personal devotion time on that. It was very good for me. Does it remind you of anything is my question then, because if there's certain things happening while those 7 plagues are being poured out in the heavenly realms in God's throne, why is it told to us? And if it's told to us, is that important? Does that mean God wanted you to know that this is what's happening while this is happening? And if so, see what I mean? How all of a sudden you go, oh yeah, never thought of that. Because if God tells it to us and all these little tiny details, every one of them has a profound message in it. Your first time through, you're going to not catch all these things. I am still catching new things that I missed before, right? So just don't beat yourself up, but learn to be and not just an observer, but an interrogator. The inductive method teaches you to ask who, what, why, when, where, and how about each of your key words, right? And that's how your list making should have been made. Who is it? Where is it? Why is it? How is it? When is it? Right? And as you make those lists through interrogation, you begin to learn. And then what happens is through the interrogation, all of a sudden other thoughts come, right? That's when that place of real meditation before God comes, where his spirit really enters in and he's your teacher, right? I had a conversation just last night with a person texting, and that was a conversation we had about how unskilled our world is today at being inquisitive, asking questions, being an objective observer. Yes, go ahead, come on in. Who? Oh, poor girl. Okay, we got a person trying to get online with our, thank you so much. That was very kind of you. She'll be happy because she won't want to miss all this good stuff. Okay. Okay, so concerning plagues, then what happened in heaven while the plagues were being poured out, and does it remind you of anything? If anyone adds to God's word, God will add to him the plagues written in this book. What does that mean? Okay, wait a second. If the plagues are specific to a certain time frame within the unfolding of this, but then the plagues are mentioned and you can actually interject them into a different time frame, now what do you do with that, right? There's an easy resolution and it makes sense once you think it through, but you have to stop and say, oh, that's weird, because he was talking about here, but now he's talking about way down here. We're talking like another 1,000 years later, right? What's that about? What if that person did that, in other words, added to or took away? What if they did that, but they are already dead before this occurs? Then is the result or the consequence, he's saying, I will do these things if you add to or take away. What if someone back in the 1800s did that? What if somebody last week did that and now they're dead? Are these still imposed upon them? Do you see the questions that can kind of come? It's really kind of fun to think this all, not that you're excited about them having those things happen to them, but of course we're all about the blessing part, right? What happens for the overcomer who does not do those things? But still, would you say that's a valuable thought to consider? Because I do think that sometimes we look at things, especially people who are not really well skilled in reading biblical things, but you can end up going, well, that doesn't make any sense, so none of it's even worth, either recognizing or discussing, or it's not even relative, it's too vague. I mean, they just blow it off, right? But if you've already thought these things through for yourself, now you can start to say, well, you have to consider this, and then you can walk them through. So that's part of the training of doing inductive Bible study, is to train you up to be articulate and mindful, having already thought some of these things through, because these questions are going to start popping up for other people. Okay, so this is training for you as you go out into the world. The blood was another key word we looked at. Blood, what did Jesus, his blood accomplish? What then is the symbolic picture or message? Historically, what do we know about blood in the eyes of God? How does God view blood, the spilling of blood, the shedding of blood? What is its designed purpose and function? For sure within the household of faith, right? Those who are God's children, which means what? What are you going to have to do in order to totally come to an understanding on that subject? What do you think? What would you do? How do you understand God's perspective or his views concerning the subject of blood? Say it again. It's life. Life is in the blood, right? And where do we know that from? Where in the Bible do we know life is in the blood? Old Testament. There we go. So now you're talking, go back to the beginning where God lays out. Remember when he called Israel out of their Egyptian captivity, he brought them through and he began teaching them. Leviticus, the whole book of Leviticus is about the holiness of God, right? And how redemption or atonement is made so that we can stand rightly before God and not be consumed, right? So the subject of blood is huge in the book of Leviticus. And if you don't catch that when you're going through Leviticus, you need to go back through Leviticus and redo that book, okay? Because that is an essential. Knowing all that way back here in the back of my head from previous studies, right? You can pull that forward then when you look in Revelation about the subject of blood and say, why does blood keep showing up? Man, this is bloody, right? There's blood here, there's blood here, there's blood here, and things turn to blood, things are consumed by blood, people are made to drink blood. We see all this subject of blood. So why is that meaningful? Why is that important? How does God view that subject? Don't just make your list and then say, oh, done with the list. But now examine, critically think it through and say, so why is this an important subject that he keeps bringing up in this book and repeating? Okay. All right. So I have whet your appetite, I hope. I have helped maybe develop your understanding of what you're doing while you're doing list making, which is very kind of boring, and it's like read it and write it down, right? And you don't change the wording as much as possible. Retain the wording of the text itself and get it on paper. Put your scripture reference at the end of your statements that you record in your list. That's all important for validating what you've said and how you came to that conclusion. And then later you can go back and even double check yourself sometimes, because occasionally in conversations in our classes, what will happen is someone will say something and you'll go, well, I didn't see it that way. What did I do? Right? Now you've got the verse right there. You can go back and reread the verse and go, oh, I shouldn't have changed those words up. I should have left them as they were stated, because it may mean something other than I emotionally felt it was. You don't want your list making to be emotionally propelled. You want your list making to be very clinical. Does that make sense? At first, it's all about the clinical observations and just getting it on paper as said. Okay. Whew. That's a lot. I know I've told you a bunch about list. This is your 101 training this morning on why you're doing list making, how you can develop it to be more than it is, and to learn then to go into the next step, which is to analyze it, meditate on it, expound on it, and also consider where else might I get more information about this so that I understand it better for this context. Now, hopefully Kay is going to take us to some of these things when we move into part 3 after the holidays are over. We'll start on part 3.
Send your list out so we can compare kind of how you do it and what we do.
I can do that. Yes.
Missing something.
Well, and just remember, I'm at a point where I have done this so many times, I'm eliminating a lot of things. And you're going to look at my list maybe sometimes and go, well, why didn't she put this? And why didn't she put that? Right? It's because I'm at a point where I'm now cleaning it up and knowing what the real message was and what all the extras were. And I'm eliminating the extras and I'm going for the meat, right? So just know that when I send mine out, that they may not be as extensive as yours, and that is fine. Put everything on yours that you need for where you're at in your development of list making. And later you're going to learn, especially after we finish doing the whole of Revelation and we've started doing our timelining, we start plugging things in, you're going to see what can fall away and what needs to remain. Okay. And that's going to be true, because certainly if you look at every instance, like you start with the first seal, the breaking of the first seal, and the horse that comes out, right? And he's coming to conquer with a bow, right? All those little details are not that important as you move on. It's just that seal is broken and that conquering occurred and what that means. You don't need necessarily all the extra details in it. So you're going to come to figure that out for yourself later. Okay, so that's that. I want to ask you another question. Again, more one-on-one training here. This time it's about the subject of visions, because what kind of literary style are we in with the book of Revelation? It's a twofold thing: prophecy and, pardon? Not an epistle, because that's a letter of doctrine, but it's a, pardon? Letters. Okay, it's prophecy and visions, right? Prophecy and visions. So on the one hand, hold on, let me find my book here. It's what John saw and what he heard. On the one hand, it's about things that are future, yes? But would you also say it's historical? Are the things that he is speaking of prophetically, are they going to be literal events in history? How do we know that? Okay. All right. Yes, that's good. So you can look at one example, which is he gave us information about the churches, and now we can historically go back and actually, I lived there, so I know these places exist, right? So you can go back to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, all of them, and you go, yes, they are literal, they're historical, they are recorded, there are ruins of these places on planet Earth yet today even. Some of them are still even in existence. The church at Smyrna, the church at Ephesus, they're there, they're just fragmented and underground, right? So yes, that's one thing. How else do we know that prophecy is going to be literal historical fact at some point?
Just any prophecy?
Yeah.
Well, because we can look at the Old Testament and see there's the prophets. Oh, and there's what happened.
Yeah. Daniel is very profound. Ezekiel is very profound for us in this particular study of Revelation, because we're going to go back. We go back to Daniel, and in Daniel, what did we learn? That through a vision, just like this one, in his, he had several different ones. He had beasts, but he also had a statue. Remember? And there was a head, and he said about the head, what? You, O king, are that head of gold. And he was speaking about Nebuchadnezzar and the kingdom of Babylon. And then there was the arms, right? And the chest of, and it was Medo. So it was Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then Rome. So we know now it's fulfilled. In other words, sometimes we have ancient prophecy that was given to us. Those things have been fulfilled. We can actually timeline them in history. We have all the research, all the books, all the authenticating of all these things. They happen, they're literal, they're truthful, right? So when we look at Revelation, consider that as well. That not only is it a book of a vision and of prophecy, that stuff that's down the line is future, but it is going to be literal and factual. How might that change the way that you look at it as we observe these things? Very good. Excellent. Oh, Carol, you are amazing me this morning, girl. Good for you. That is exactly right. I couldn't have said it better myself. Just the outline of this book, and that's probably a good place for us to start. One of the things I want to do is to work on this at a glance chart that you should have in your own papers somewhere. I hope you've got them like in the front of your book where you can find them quickly. Your at a glance chart. I can tell you my at a glance charts, once I get them finished, I do like to do them on my computer, as you can see, because I can make them smaller and they aren't so messy. But I like to put these in the back of my Bible. And then when I'm in a class and somebody's teaching on anything, Romans or one of the epistles or whatever, I can pull out my at a glance chart and just kind of review real quickly. I mean, real quickly, I can lay this out and go, okay. And then when they drop in, they start talking about something, I can know if they are using it correctly and if they're actually giving correct insight, right? So that's one of the things I like to do. So these at a glance charts, I think it's important for us to try to develop them. So this is one of the things we want to do this morning. You did all that list making. We're going to talk about your list, but I'm not going to write them on the board, just so you know. I do want to do the day one's homework was in the spirit, right? We're going to talk about that one and see all of the possibilities that you can even subdivide that one down a little bit into other kinds of titles. But let's start with that first one, that book outline that you brought up, okay? What is the book outline and where do we find that in our Revelation study? I know it's been a long time ago since we talked about it. Chapter 1, verse 19. Okay, chapter 1, verse 19. And so in 119, it gives us an outline. We would call that outline a segment division, right? Okay. So the outline gives us a segment division. It's very neat. It's very precise, and it's really amazing how God himself gives this one to us so clearly. We see this in several books. The book of Acts does it also. You know, you're to go out into Judea, Samaria, or to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the uttermost parts of the world. So it tells you this progressive spreading of the gospel after Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection, and his instruction to the building up of the church, the beginning or establishing of the church. Here we have simply an outline about this book, and he says in chapter 1:9. So you got a segment division. How do you break it down? What is the first segment? Okay, and that's found in what chapter? What chapter are the things that you have seen? What did he saw? He saw Jesus. And what chapter was that he saw Jesus in? Chapter 1. So it was what John saw, right? Chapter 1. All right. Now, what's the next segment division? The things that are. And what chapters are the things that are? 2 and 3. And what is the things that are? It's the church. Okay, so here's our little cute church. I guess I should give it some windows so it doesn't look empty. Okay, so that's in chapters 2 and 3. First segment division, what John saw. I really probably didn't need to give it that much room, but what John saw. Then chapter 2 and 3, the things that are. And then what is our last segment division in that? Okay, the things. Oops, I almost can't reach it. That will take place when? After these things. What things? the things that are, right? So it's going to be after this, correct? The things that are. And what part of our book is covered in that last segment division there?
4 to 22.
Yep, chapter 4 to 22. Now, how does that help you just by doing an observation in a bigger view without all the details, but to see that breakdown? How does that help you? Oh, good job. Yes.
Really are referring to past events, and yet God said these other things will take place after.
Right. After these things. Right. And the language itself really does tell you that there's a progression of order. And when you get into looking at the things that are falling in this segment, the things that will take place after these things, you start seeing things like the seals and the trumpets and the bowls. And do they also do that for you in that they show you that there's actually a sequence of order that it has to be locked into? I can't wait till we go into that in more detail, but simply by the observations that you've looked at so far, let's do a real quick one over here. We see it's a book that has Jesus is worthy, right? To open this book. That's what we saw in chapters 5, correct? Is that correct? Can you tell? Oh, they can't see it, maybe. Oh, it's her phone. Okay. All right, so we're going to tip that for you there. Okay, so we see in chapter 5, Jesus is worthy. And what is he worthy to do? To open the seals. And when he opens the seals, how distinctive is it? What does it tell you? When you look at the seals and he opens, it says what? Right then, and he says he opens what? The first seal?
Oh, the second seal.
And then he opens the second seal. Are you seeing what I'm saying? So it's it's progressive, it's numerical, it's in a logic of number sequencing. Would you, if you were counting with your 3-year-old to teach them how to count, would you say 1, 7, 8, 12, 13, 4, 9? I mean, would you do that? No. So counting in and of itself, just the logic of it for us, the first, the second, the third, the fourth, right, shows you that it's progressive in a certain locked in order. Yes, it's very orderly. I love that subject, by the way, how God has ordered things and how it's one of the things that we talked about very briefly, but when we were talking about the symbolic message of numbers, even, right? How in some things it talks about, like the king, for instance, the thrones that are before God's throne room in chapter 4, just before this, and there were 24 elders, right? We see often the number 12 shows up. We see just very precise numbering, and what it shows you is that God has it ordered. It's an orderly. And by the way, when he set up the tribes of Israel in the beginning, how many? 12 tribes. And when he set them up, he gave them distinctive places and an order in which to go in. And he assigned some of them even specific ministries, right? And no one outside of that was to come in. It was locked in for orderliness, for to cause things to work in a way that was smooth and without disruption, right? Without bickering amongst one another. It was, this is who will do it. Done, right? No discussion, it's done. This gives us what as his people? Yes, absolutely. Right. Do you remember what happened with Israel in the days of Christ, even by that time? What had happened to the priesthood, for instance, the Levitical bloodline, who had been a distinguished group for a specific work? What had they begun to do by that time, and even before? But they were,
I mean, they married into other.
well, they did do that too. Yes, they had married and shouldn't have. But when it comes to the priesthood, who the Levitical bloodline, the Levites have been said, this is your ordered work, and that order and what is the assignment, the designated assignment have been given to the Levitical blood. Well, then they began selling off the priesthood and having people from other places, even Gentiles, some of them coming in and being part of the Sanhedrin and part of the ruling order in Israel, and it caused all these problems. This is really interesting. So when you think about order, when it says Jesus is worthy, and then he began to open the seals, and he did it in a concise, consecutive order. This is really profound. I think it does exactly as you said. It gives you peace when you know, 3 comes next, now 4, now 5. It's kind of like have counted down at Christmas time with your grandkids now, or your children before, and you watch the numbers on as you moved from the first day of December all the way down to the 25th. It gives you a sense of understanding of what's going on. So when he says he has the first seal, the second seal, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh, and when the 7th seal is broken, what do you see comes out of that 7th seal? The next set of stuff. Now, what does that tell you then about the next set of stuff? Can it come before? Yeah, it can't. No. So from the 7th seal, then you see, so these are the seals. Now you're going to see what comes out? Trumpets. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. What comes out of the 7th trumpet? Bowls. And then how are they numbered? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So just by looking at that, as far as making an observation in this book, how does that help you already? Is it beginning to make sense of some things? Now, here's the interesting part, though. We also have in this book moments where you're moving along. Here's the first, the second, the third, the fourth, and then all of a sudden they stop and they throw something in, right? So now let's talk about those. Let's talk about those interruptions. I call these parentheses moments, right? We have several of them. Does anybody know where our parentheses statements come? Okay, chapter 7. Our first one is going to be chapter 7, and we're going to call these parentheses. Okay. These are, I don't know how else to title this segment division, but it's, I probably spelled that wrong, right? Parentheses, parenthesis, segments. What do you see these parenthesis segments do for you? Let's start with chapter 7. What happens in chapter 7? Yeah, yes, so in essence, he answers, was it 6:17? Okay, thought so. He answers this question that is posed in 6:17. Okay, that happens to be an answer to a question, but what happens when we get our next parentheses? Where is that one? Okay, we're in chapter 10. Now, what's going on in chapter 10? There's a book that John is told to eat. Now let's look at that chapter 10 together. Open to your observation worksheets, chapter 10, because we're going to talk about if we can really hone in on what the major subject is in this particular chapter, so you have a really nice, concise title for this chapter. Because it's a parentheses moment, how do we know it's a parentheses moment?
Something going on outside that trumpet.
Yeah, because it was going first, second, third, right? So we have somewhere with this one in chapter 7, where does it fall here in our seals? After the 6. So here we have that chapter 10, right? Parentheses. sorry, chapter 7, parentheses, right? And it falls right in between the 6th seal and the 7th seal. Now we're looking at the chapter 10 one, and where does that one fall?
In the sixth. Meaning like, it's in the middle of the sixth. When you sound the
In
trumpet.
the middle of the 6th trumpet, right? So right here in the middle, we have chapter 10, and I'm putting parentheses around there as my statement. This is a parentheses. What is happening before is the 6th trumpet has been sounded already, but it's not finished, right? It's before. So if it's the 6th trumpet, what is it before? The 7th trumpet. I know that sounds like a really stupid thing to make a statement about, but I'm wanting you to really think about this on your timeline. Okay, so when he stops in the middle of the 6th to give you some information here, he talks about this strong angel. And then verse 1 through 7 are, well, really 1 through 5 at least, he gives you all kinds of information. Is it important? Well, it might be, but what does he tell you about that information? Do you remember in verse 4? Very last 3 or 4 words there. Or do not write them, right? Verse 4 of 10. Do not write them. So what does that tell you as far as you and I, when we're looking at what's trying to be conveyed in this chapter? Even though there's stuff going up there and they're showing you kind of there's a mystery about things going on beyond, right? What's being told to us, there's even yet more. But it's being withheld from us for good reason, because God knows what we need to know. Whatever it is, he holds it back. He says, don't write that. And he says, and then I saw the angel whom I saw standing at the sea and on the land, with the land, lifted up his right hand to heaven. Now, who knows what that is all about? When you see a Hebrew person, because this is who the audience would be, they stand and they lift their right hand to heaven and they begin to make a declarative statement. And he goes on to explain, he says, and he swore by him who lives forever and ever. What do you do in a court of law?
Raise your right hand.
You raise your right hand to heaven and you swear to what? Tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, right? So help me God. So here we have a strong angel. We've got a whole bunch of stuff we don't need to know about. Don't write it down, right? Okay, so just skip it, right? Starting verse 6, he stands there, he raises his right hand to heaven, and he begins to make declarative statement in the name of who? God, who sits on this throne, right? The one who lives forever and ever. And if you're not sure who that is, it's he who created heaven and the things in it, and the earth and the things in it, and the sea and the things in it, that there will be delay no longer. Okay, delay about what? Well, he's going to tell you in the verse 7. In the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he is about to sound, then the mystery of God is finished. And if you don't know what the mystery of God is finished, what does he tell you? It's what he has preached to his servants, the prophets. So now, if you tie that into the context that you're in, what is he speaking about then? What did he preach to the prophets? What kind of things? What book are we in? Revelation. It's about what happening? The justice and the judgments and the rewards of God that he's promised, right? So this is making, he's saying, look, everything that God said about all that I'm telling you right now, I'm telling you, and I'm swearing by him who lives forever, that in the days of the voice of the 7th trumpet, which is about to sound, that mystery that they, particularly of the Old Testament, found very profoundly. Did we not even just 5 years ago find a lot of this still yet confusing? And look how much more we now see, and it's beginning to unfold before our very eyes. What about 70 plus years ago, a little over 70 years ago? Israel was not yet back on her land No one could have even begun to imagine that God meant it literally, right? So what had the church done in many, many years previous to that, starting, I think, all the way back to Calvin, right?
They made the revelation to be about Christians.
Yes, they made the whole thing, the whole stuff about the saints that are stated here about being about us, the church. They eliminated Israel, the nation, because they thought, no, surely it can't be about Israel. But now that Israel's back, what? Does it totally change your perspective on what we're looking at here? For sure. And of course, once you're in the Word of God long enough, you begin to realize that there is no way that God was not going to fulfill what he promised to, and as he preached to his servants, the prophets, because he said specifically to Jeremiah, as long as the sun, the moon, and the star remain, my words to you are absolute and they will never fail. I will perform and do every word that I have spoken, right? So here we see, this is what he's saying. And he's saying that mystery, the mystery of God is finished. It's going to be what? Now it's going to be revealed and totally known. Even yet right now, we still have a few things we're scratching our head on, right? And going, I'm not sure what that means exactly. But guess what? In the days of the voice of the seventh trumpet, it's going to be made known. Now, why has he done this in the middle of the sixth seal? Why has he said it at this point? He's going along. We're in the middle of the sixth seal, or the sixth trumpet, rather. We're in the sixth trumpet. I'm going to put trumpet on here so I see it. That's my trumpet. Up here are the seals. These are the bowls. I can do a bowl pretty quick. Okay. So we have the trumpets going on in the middle of the sixth. He's telling us about something that's going to occur when? In the next one that's coming up. Does that make sense to put it there? And why has he done this? It's like, again, it's a parenthesis. So in this segment division, we've hit a parenthesis in the book. And now he's saying, pay attention because something's about to happen. He makes a proclamation. The angel comes down. He brings this little book. And before he even addresses the little book, he says, look, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. In the days of the next trumpet that will sound, the mystery of God will be finished. So he's making this declaration. Why does he put it here? It's pretty simple. It makes sense to put it here. You wouldn't. Have you ever been in a car driving down the road with somebody who's giving you directions how to get there? And as you pass the street, they go, oh, you were supposed to turn back there. How many of us have had that happen? Like a million times, right? Does it make sense that he would stop, make a pause in the middle of the sixth to say, now listen, when you see the seventh trumpet, when that's opened and revealed to you, I'm telling you, in that day, in that time, that's when the mystery of God is going to be finished. Is it making sense? Okay, it's a parenthesis. So if you wanted, you could even just on your, I'm going to do it on mine, put a little parenthesis around your title there that says Revelation 10. Okay, you might want to just put a parenthesis there. If, like what's going to happen now is we're going to have a bigger parenthesis and it's going to cover more. So what you could do is at the beginning of that parenthesis, put it in parentheses above it and let yourself know how many chapters it's going to encompass, because we have one more parentheses. That these are segment divisions that I think help you see the format of this book, how the book lays out. So what do you see is the last parentheses that we're going to cover? So chapter 10 gives us chapter 10, and he says in the seventh trumpet, mystery is finished. And that was 10:7. 10:6. Okay. Okay. All right. So now you know this is what the parentheses is. It's telling you that something is coming up. Something ahead. Right? Or warning, or pay attention, right? Right? Pay attention. Something's coming up. I want you to see it. I don't want you to miss it. Don't miss that turn. It's coming. So that's what chapter 10 is all about. It's a moment to say, pay attention, something important, something profound is about to happen. All right, so now that's in chapter 10. And then 11 picks up again with that the end of the sixth trumpet and moves into the seventh. Now what happens? Where's our next parentheses? It's in chapter 12. So here's another segment division that you can mark off. This particular segment division, what it's going to do for you if you lay this out, here's how I did it on my chart. No, I didn't do it on my chart. Well, yeah, I did. All I did was I went along and I colored my boxes in where there were parentheses with green. Can you see it? Just so I could see where the parentheses are going to lie and I can catch it quickly with my eye and I can go, oh yeah, that's that parentheses moment. Yeah, but later, not now, because I'm using it. This is my teaching chart. Yeah, all right. Okay, now, what is the next segment that you see that interrupts the flow of first, second, third, fourth? It's after chapter, or after the seventh trumpet sounds, right? It's in chapter 11, verse 15, right? We see the seventh trumpet is sounded, correct? And then we see in 12:1, signs begin to be given to us, correct? Do you remember what I said to you about these two signs? The first sign is about the woman. The second sign is about the red dragon, who's Satan. Ah, good girl. But there's a third one. Remember, this book's all about patterns and numbers. And 3 is a symbolic message of what? Completion or perfection, right? It's finished, it's completed. So anytime there are 3s of things, you know it. First of all, it's also very much affixed to God, who is a triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? A 3-part God. So we have now this 3 signs that are given to us. The first one is the woman who has a son, a significant son, right? We have the dragon, and then the last one comes up where? In chapter 15, verses 1 through 4. Okay, so now we have this one, and it's chapter 12, starting in verse 1, and it runs through 15, verse 4. And I call this segment division the 3 signs. Okay, and what this does for us is what? Well, where are we in this one? We're at the 7th trumpet. We're right in the middle of it again. And we're at chapter 12:1. We go to 15:4, and there's a parenthesis given. And in that parenthesis time, this time, what is given to us? What do you see happening in those? Huh? Backstory, for sure. Because we see, for instance, the woman and her son are mentioned, right? And we get more details about who this woman is and who her son is, right? Who is the son? Jesus. What does it tell us about him? Yeah, he is to rule all the nations. Now, we're in a book that's talking very much about a kingdom that's to come, right? Whose kingdom? Jesus's kingdom. So in this case, we have a woman gives birth to a son who is going to be a ruler of basically the world, right? Now we get backdrop to who this Jesus is, who all the way back in chapter 1, he's identified as a major subject, and it's what John saw, and what John saw was so profound. As a matter of fact, when you looked at that chapter 10 parentheses, the one who is, who was, who is to come is repeated again. We see these kinds of comments over and over. established for us all the way back here. Now he says, okay, this is the one that I talked about in the beginning, the one who's now breaking the seals, right? Or has broken the seals at this point. Now he says about him, I'm going to give you a little bit more insight that's significant to the storyline. So now, do you have any questions then about why these points are brought up about him? I would recommend you take a moment at some time in your homework, begin to make a list about who the Son is and what points are pointed out. And why are those points? I mean, think about Jesus on the whole. Do we have like quite a bit of information about this Jesus throughout all of the Word of God? If you start all the way back in Genesis chapter 3, how is he introduced to us there? He's the seed that is going to do what? Crush the head of Satan, who happens to be, by the way, the second sign. And in this second sign, what information are we given about him? You need to make a list on that. One of the interesting things is we have a couple of wars that go on here. Are they wars that occur at the same time in history or at different times in history? Right? You need to know, you need to figure that out. The first one, it talks about him sweeping away with his tail a third of the stars, right? And then it goes on and then it says, and so he sweeps them away and he stands before the woman to do what? Devour the baby. So where in history did his sweeping away of a third happen? Before or after the birth of the Son? Before. So now you're starting to get a timeline. Okay, so this particular war is before Jesus is born, okay? Then it says, and he gave birth to a son, a male child. She talks about them. It says, and then the woman fled to the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. We've seen that over and over. What time frame is that? How much time is that? 3.5 years, right? Then it says, and so now you know this is a conjunction. It supports then, or it's added on. It follows what has just been told you about the woman running to the wilderness to hide. And it says, and there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. And the dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough. There was no longer a place found for them in heaven. Okay, now we are in this parentheses in chapter 12:1, right, about the dragon. What are we learning about the dragon then in this first part? He has what? He's a dragon. He has 7 heads, 10 horns, right? And on his heads are what? Crowns, diadems, right? So you have to start putting together a list on all the points about this and see if there's a sequential order that's going to be revealed to you. But what happens is, though, have we left the timeline of this with this information? Well, it's details, but how, if you were to timeline the information about Jesus, it has its own timeline within it, right?
Out to say, look, this is
No, this sequence remains the same, but this parentheses goes outside of this timeline. This information is not, all of it is not happening here, because Jesus is born, he dies, he's resurrected. That's not during this time, right? That's been way back in history before. So that's my point. So what you're seeing when you look at these 3 signs is the information about who is Jesus, what is his dynamic relationship with Satan, what is Satan's goals, what is he doing, why is he there, how is he going to act and respond, correct? And then we go on to it tells us in verse 12, actually it's 10 through 12. And then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. So we're now here. What did he say in chapter 10? Yeah, pay attention. in the seventh trumpet, what? The mystery of God is finished. Now he's saying in 12:1, in this parentheses, he's giving you details of information. And he's saying, then I heard a voice in heaven, the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. Whoa, that's profound. And the mystery of God is going to be finished. That makes sense, does it not? That it would be clarified to you at this point concerning the information about the dragon. Because what is the whole storyline been about since the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3? The tug of war, the power control over the hearts of men, and who's going to be king, right? It's such a beautiful thing. I mean, you can start it at Genesis. This is why Kay, every time she teaches, like me, you can't stop. You just keep going everywhere, right? You don't even know what to cut out so that because you want everyone to be able to grab a hold of that thread and pull and see how it all connects. Genesis Genesis 3 goes to Genesis 15, goes to Galatians 3, and then it goes all the way down here to the very end, right? And you see that thread and you pull on it, and you can gather all these principles or these points. What is going on in Revelation? Why is it there? Why the blood? What's the blood about? Why is that significant? We'll go all the way back to Genesis and start running through the scriptures to see how blood is significant to God and how he views it and why he uses it then as a symbolic message in this book. Okay? All right. You know he knows. As a matter of fact, he says here in verse 12, for this reason, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because why? The devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing what? He has only a short time. So not only does he know about what's up, first of all, he's going to know why. Well, there's the spiritual realm is there, and
it's not a mystery to us. It's certainly not a mystery.
no, exactly. The things that have been revealed have been revealed. I almost wonder if some of those thunderbolts and lightnings are there to keep Satan confused, right? We don't want him to know all this stuff. This is the backstory of our logistics going on. We don't want him to know this yet, right? Yeah. So deluded. He knows he's wrong. He knows he's going to lose. He knows the end of the story. Yes. And he's going to be going into this abyss for 1,000 years. He knows all this. And yet what does he do? He moves forward. His heart is so this.
Like the whole thing is about trying, like when he's trying to devour the child. If I could stop that,
then I can.
There's all these points in the timeline where he could try
yes.
to stop the plan to work on.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He said, I will be like the Most High. And it's like you can't turn loose of that.
Yes. Boy, we could talk about politics right now, couldn't we? Because if you look at the world, honestly, we've got so much stuff right now falling down around our heads. Our America as a nation is crumbling, and the policymakers that are in charge know what they're doing is causing these problems, and yet what do? They dig their heels in, and they want what they want, and they don't care. They don't care that it's destroying our world and our safety and our possibility for prosperity and all those things that we need as a nation. They just keep going. So this is, if there's no better example of what's going on in the heart of Satan, just look at our politics. People can be absolutely convinced, but they can still be absolutely wrong, right? And what is it that makes the difference? It's when your eyes are opened. Who holds truth? Who holds truth? God does. God is truth. If you want to know what is true about how a nation is to be run, how a people are to be ruled over, because that is what we're talking about in this book. go to God's word and say, what did God want from the very beginning? What are our inalienable rights, right? And what was our constitution in this nation built on? I'm not talking politics. I am talking scripture here. God, the demonstration was given to us through our founding fathers in our constitution. And those principles, although not perfect, were as carefully crafted as possible and directly from the word of God. So it's just a shadow.
Is it Isaiah that talks where it has the three names of God, the judge and the whatever, and that's how our three
yes.
systems of government are. It's the three aspects of God in that.
Yeah. I love the truth part project with Dale Tackett. That's a great, I've got that, by the way, if anybody ever would like to borrow it. It's kind of heavy in a way, and each one is a full hour. And I think there's 12 of them in there. He goes through all these different pillars. One of them is about government and how God designed government to be set up and what he wanted. And actually our government in America, what our founding fathers gave us, although certainly we have flaws in some of the execution, the principles that are written in the constitutional rights are absolutely declaratively right from the word of God. So if we would follow them and keep them and honor them and respect them and thus respect and honor God, we would do well. Okay. All right. So now now what I want to do is, I'm sorry, get back on schedule. I know I have 45 minutes, no problem. I always say that, don't I? It'll be fine. It'll be fine, trust me. Okay, so 3 segment divisions, which I call parentheses segments. Chapter 7, where he answers the question, and he gives us a beautiful picture of 2 people groups who we see in the unfolding of these events, and he's saying about them, who can stand? Well, the first one is given to us, and it's those who are what? The bondservants of God, who are sealed by God for a specific mission and ministry, whatever that is. We are, although they're not mentioned, there's another significant group that's sealed and marked and set apart that's going to go through a lot of this, and that's those 2 witnesses. They're not mentioned among the 144,000, but there's also them. So what you can know about the answer is the 144,000 symbolically is, I wouldn't just declare the 144,000. What I would say is who are bondservants, who are sealed for a purpose in that time frame. Okay. The second part of that is the multitudes that are presented to us, who are from every tribe, tongue, nation, right? And it says, who are they? They're the ones who will come out of the great tribulation, because why? They have been washed by the blood of Jesus, their garments made white. They will stand before God in his throne. So he tells us who can stand during that time. So what does that tell for us, you and I, about this time frame that we're looking at? There's hope. Yeah, we won't be here, and there's hope. Now, there's going to be some that'll be here, though, and that's those who are what I call tribulation saints. The church is distinctive. That's why we see here the things that are right now. But then there's going to be the things that will come after these things. And that's who we're looking at then in those chapters, or chapter 7, rather, where he answers that question, who can stand? Well, anyone who's sealed by God for a ministry purpose, and those who are washed by the blood of Christ because they've come into faith during that time. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean what? Do you think they'll live or die during that time? Physically. Could be either. Some of those tribulation saints will die during that time. Some of those tribulation saints may make it through all the way to the end. But what you know is they will stand, because what he asks in his question is, who can stand? Who can stand against the wrath of God that's being poured out, the earthquakes that are being administered, the plagues that are going to be coming? It's those who come into faith, right? Okay, so that's a cool one. Great parentheses, right? Makes you feel much better about knowing that even if you have a loved one that is left behind, they have opportunity. If they believe God, if they will come into that faith, God says, you will stand before me in the righteous robes of those that have been washed by the blood. Okay, the second parenthesis gives us a warning, warning, attention, attention. Something important is coming in this next trumpet. The next trumpet comes, and right away we get another parenthesis. And in that one, what we get is backstory. We get information about all those characters. So these are the characters on the stage. Okay?
So actually, right from there, you could get that's Israel.
Oh,
The woman is Israel.
yes, very good. Good observation.
It's not about.
Good observation. Who are the characters on the stage? Well, it's about the woman. And who is the woman? It's not Mary, right? Who is the woman depicting? And she has 12 stars over her head, right? Israel, the nation of Israel. Okay. So, all right. So that's our second segment division. Now, the third one I want to talk about super quick, woes. We talked about the woes a moment ago, briefly, but you tell me what you know about the woes. When do the woes come? When is the first announcement that there are woes coming? What did I do? I didn't write it down. Hold on. Here it is. Okay. 8:13. Okay. So in chapter 8:13, what does it tell us? Woe, woe, woe. Why? The sound of remaining what? Trumpets. Okay, so we have, when is the first woe? When does it when does it end? When does it finish? At the close of what? I forgot to write it on. Yes, okay, fifth trumpet. And first woe is past, and that was verse what? 9:12. Okay, so there's one. So now you know you're in the, there's my trumpet, fifth trumpet, right? And now the next woe. What did I do here? I didn't write it on here. I'm confusing myself, and I had it on here. Here it is. Okay, there we go. Okay, then the next one is going to be, again, it's in the trumpet. It's the sixth trumpet, right? And that one says second woe, right? And third one is coming soon, right? And this one's in, the second woe is past was finished up in 11:14, right? Okay. So you start early on, but you're going, but I'm not giving, all I'm trying to do is give you markers by trumpets rather than trying to give you all the verses. Too much information if you do it that way. All you need to know is you've got your first woe here is in the fifth trumpet. Your second woe is in the sixth trumpet. And where is your third? If this tells you, whoa, 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 the sounding of the remaining what? Trumpets. Now you've got the next trumpet. What happens after your sixth trumpet? Your seventh trumpet. And that's going to be your third woe. Now this one though was a little trickier because there was not a final verse after that seventh trumpet finished up saying the third trumpet is finished, right? But where do you see information about the subject of it being a time of woe?
All the woes together would take out 1/3 of mankind.
That's another reference. Yes, now that you're talking about Babylon is the next time we see the subject woe come up. It doesn't come up again until Babylon. But Okay, it says the third woe we know that it's going to be in the progressive order because it tells us so here, right? First woe, second woe, and then it says that the other one is coming quickly, right? There you go. And when you get your detailed information in chapter 12 through 15 is the subject of woe brought up there. Where it's just filling in extra information, isn't he? Right? Okay, but can you pull out of that maybe a potential understanding of why that woe is in the seventh trumpet, why that third woe is there? What does it say in verse 12? Yeah, 12:12. Yeah, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing he has only a short time. Now that's interesting. He's brought down. Now, what did it say back in chapter 12, verse 7? Yeah, there was a war in heaven. And what happened? Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels waging war. And they were not strong enough. There was no longer found a place for them in heaven. Now you go to verse 12 of chapter 12, and it says, woe to the earth, woe to the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing he has only a short time. Now this parentheses is placed between during the time of the seventh trumpet. So what does that tell you then if you're looking for where this woe is? And what is the relationship of this third woe? Because why? Because the devil has come down. Yeah, or was thrown. You're right. You're right. I like that better. See, that's where you got to keep your words right. THR. Thank you. Thrown down. I want so badly to say he's come down, but there's a significant difference between coming down and being thrown down, right? So this is in 12:12, that little piece of information, and that word woe comes up for you there. Now, pardon?
In the book of Job, Satan was walking to and fro in the earth. God asked him, kind of like, what's up? What are you
Right.
doing here?
Well, and he came before God for what reason?
To accuse Job.
To get permission to go after Job and to persecute him.
Back and forth.
And he's going back and forth.
Is this the first time he has been thrown out of heaven?
What do you think? Where are we in the timeline of history of events happening? In the subject of this book, where are we? We're at the end time. We're all the way at the end, just before Jesus is going to establish his kingdom. And so what we're seeing then is we've come along here. We're somewhere in the seventh trumpet, and it says, whoa, why? Because what? The devil has come down. So right now he's still going back and forth. And as a matter of fact, what does that tell you about the devil prior to the seventh trumpet? He still has access and going up and down and up. There's still the spiritual warfare that's going on. But it's a very subtle mention in that parentheses, but it mentions the word woe, which is one of those things that we were looking at because we were list making. And so it took us there. So we looked at it. We're going, whoa, the second woe is past. We get that. Okay, first woe is done. The second woe is done. The third one doesn't ever say it's done. But in the parentheses moment, he says, whoa. And we know that we're in the seventh trumpet also. So it's almost like it's a confirmation that we are lining up the information that comes out of 12:12, right? And he says, whoa. And we know now we've got a woe, we got a woe, and we've got a woe. It has to be here that this is a woe. And here he says woe because of why? Satan who has come down. Is that starting to kind of line up really nicely for you at this point? It's making a little bit of sense.
That's prior to the first woe.
Yes, it is. So interesting, very much interesting, because when the first bowl begins to happen in your list making, what did you learn about the bowls? What was it's the wrath of God. And what is its design purpose? Is this mine? No, that's yours. I don't know who. Yeah. As a matter of fact, when he's talking in Babylon, he says to her, and you deserve it, right? He literally makes that statement, and you deserve it. Yes, yes, yes. I gave her time to repent. And then all the other times where you see it, except for there's one statement where you see, and there was an earthquake, right? And the people gave God glory. A tenth of the city fell, 7,000 died. And that is where does that happen? It happens in Jerusalem. And which trumpet are we in? Yeah, the two witnesses. It's the sixth trumpet. 11 to 13. Okay, 11:11. Is that correct? Yep, that's it. And in that hour, there was a great earthquake. A tenth of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. That's very interesting, because this is how this idea of right here, a tenth of the city falls right here, and here is the only place where they give glory. All the other times, what happens? They do not repent. Men will not repent, and they blaspheme the name of God, and they will not repent. But one mention, and it's in the city, which is what city? Jerusalem. There is a great earthquake. It happens in the sixth trumpet, and it's that second woe. And at that time, this earthquake causes people, some of them who are left, who in Jerusalem did not get killed. There are a remnant that was left right after this great earthquake, and it says, and they gave God glory. Isn't that interesting? It seems like a setup to me, something else to come yet. Okay. All right. So now we're done with the three woes. Now that let's look one more segment division. This one is in the spirit. How much time do I have?
You have 30 minutes.
Oh, good. Okay. So we are going to do in the spirit segment division. This one is so awesome. I did not discover this as a segment division until the last time I did this particular study, or was it the time before? Anyway, but it wasn't in the beginning. In the beginning, I just kept looking at in the spirit and saying, okay, yeah, it says in the spirit. I saw a repeated phrase, but that was all I picked up on. But then eventually I started to see something here. When you, and the reason I saw it is because I was examining again the flow of thought and how things are presented, how God uses what would you call it, literary structures and rules, basically. I mean, God is the creator of language, right? And although we're looking at it in English, which by the way is a hindrance to us because often we mess it up in our translations, enough that we lose certain pieces that can really explain things to us. So we have to dig harder just to research the history and how the people of that day would have perceived it and understood it, how John understands it, how a Jewish mind thinks about these things, because that's who's receiving all of this, right? So God is using language. And one of the things I noticed was whenever God gives things like visions and like historical layouts, how does he go about doing that? Well, apparently at one point I had just freshly taught Genesis. One of the things I noticed in Genesis was how how the literary style of it flows and where some of the complications come in, how people interpret that chapter 1 and 2 of Genesis. In Genesis chapter 1, does anybody remember just off the top of the head kind of what's in chapter 1? Yeah, it's an overview, a big picture. It goes first day, second day, third day, very just like we're seeing here, just these real quick, boom, 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 first day, second day, right? So you get, and again, 7, perfection and completion. So in Genesis, you get that same idea of concise, very compact, minimal use of language and words, but saying and conveying a lot, right? Then we go to chapter 2. What does chapter 2 do? It narrows down, it focuses in on one day and one primary subject, who is who? Man. Who man is and how he fits into this dynamic. What it reveals to us in doing that, by the way, is that the focus of God's creation was who? Man. He created for us, for our blessing and for our use and for our what do you call it, sustenance and maintaining of who we are as human beings, right? So everything was created with us in mind. So we go in, as we're looking at the literary style of Genesis, it's big picture, detail, right? Have we seen something similar to that in Revelation? Okay, so think of that when you look at Revelation in this phrase, in the Spirit. So we have the very first in the Spirit is chapter 1. And what do we see happening in chapter 1? When is the next in the Spirit, by the way? Not until chapter 4. So this first in the Spirit will be chapter 1 through chapter what? 3, right? Well, yeah, but you can cut it off at the end of 3. Okay, because the first part of that very first verse, it actually leads you into that statement in the Spirit. Okay, so what I did was this. I took a chart, I copied and pasted the 4 in the Spirit statements so that I could just observe them laying side by side. And then I laid it and evaluated in the context of all that I'm looking at here and say, so what am I seeing? One of the, and you could actually do it with even just a segment like this. And you say, okay, so where does that fall? Well, these fall, this is chapter, starts in chapter 4, which is what we're going to see, right? In the Spirit, 1-3, in the Spirit is chapter 4. And then when is the next one? 17. So we can go through 16, correct? Now we can see this one in the Spirit. It begins in 17 and it runs through what? When is the next one? In the Spirit is chapter 21 and 22. So this one goes through 20, sorry. 20, okay. Now, when you think about the book on the whole, because now here, I think I'll go ahead and use this bottom section to kind of subdivide some of these thoughts. What is going on in chapter 1 through 3? If you're thinking about the concept of how God uses the language to express insights and opinions, and how is the flow of it going? Genesis started big picture, and then detail, right? What did we have here though in chapter 1 through 3? Well, it was all about who Jesus is, right? How much information did we get about who Jesus was? A lot. Then it was letters to the churches. How much information did we get about different kinds of churches? A lot. So would you call that detail or big picture? Detail in the Spirit. So we have detail. All right, now we go into chapter 4 to 16. And what's covered in 4 to 16? All of this, right? How much Detail, well, there's a lot of information because it's a lot of activity. But are there details expressed in any one particular thing? I mean, it just is okay. A man on a white horse comes conquering and to conquer. Lots of detail. Would you like to know more?
Yes.
Oh yeah, it whet your appetite. That's all it really did. So what do we see then in chapter 4 to 16? After details, we see big picture. Now, what happens in 17 to 20?
More detail. That's the judgment of Babylon, Christ returns, Satan bound.
Yes, I'm looking for my page 2 on my chart. Hold on, 7, 8.
I'm very happy when I figure things out.
Oh, I'm so glad you did. You know what?
Just clunking. I was like, oh, that's not.
That is so cool. That is so cool. Oh, I'm finding where in the world is my other? I have too many pieces of paper here. I'm looking for the other half of my chart. It looks like this. Are these, what's this down here? Do you suppose? There it is. It's on the floor. How did that happen? I do not know. There's my book words too, my studies I couldn't find earlier. Okay. See, you should never throw your things around. That's just not right. Okay, so, we're looking at 17 to 20. Now, 17 to 20, we see again, then what? If the pattern is details, big picture, what do you assume the next one was going to be? It's probably going to be details. Now, let's see if we can kind of affirm that for just a moment. What do we see going on in those verses?
Descriptive judgment of Babylon.
Yeah. When does the judgment of Babylon come? If you're looking at this chart here, it has to come in the bowls, right? And probably it looks to me like these bowls are all poured out. The final one says, now let me show you what? The judgment of Babylon, right? That's in chapter 17 and 18, correct? Now, what did it say in the 7th bowl? Did it mention Babylon? I can't remember if it did or not. Ah, there we go.
That's 18.
Okay, no, then that's not going to work. Okay, that's not it. The 7th angel poured out his bowl on the air with a loud voice, the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." There were flashes of lightning, sounds and peals of thunder. There was a great earthquake. The great city was split in 3 parts. Now we know what that is, right? And nations fell. And then what's the next word? Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of wine of his fierce wrath. So that's in 1619. That's the 7th bowl. Correct? Are you following me? So now all of a sudden you go from chapter 16 to chapter 17, and now it says, oh, hey, hold on, wait a minute. The 7th angel and who had those 7 bowls came and spoke with me saying, come here, I'm going to show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters. So then what happens in 17 and 18? All those details about the harlot and her judgment, right? Then we go into 19. We see a war going on. Hold on a second, let me go here. We see praises in heaven. The first thing they do is they praise him for the judgment, right, of the harlot, who is Babylon. And then in 19:7 and 8, it tells us there's a marriage supper that's going to come on. Kings and kingdoms come to judge and wage war. Who is that? Kings of kings, the King of Kings comes
Jesus.
to judge. Yeah,
Jesus.
that's Jesus. I really should just say Jesus because that makes sense to me, but the text says King, the King of Kings. So the King of Kings comes to judge and to wage war. You see that in 9 to 16. So you're getting all these details about what's going on where, in what bowl? The 7th bowl. And so then we stopped at the end of 19, but you could go on and do the next segment as well. But so what you see then again is those are the details about things that are happening where? In the 7th bowl, right? All right, now 21 and 22, what does that do for us? If we've gone details, now what's next? Big picture. What's the big picture about? The new heaven, the new heaven and new earth. We see Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, and he calls her the bride. He gives you a lot of details about the metrics of the city itself, but the emphasis is that within that city is who? The bride, right? Us, the bride, worshiping and being before in the presence of God. Okay, so that's in 21, and then 22 again. It is a closing, just a sweeping closing. I'm coming quickly, right? So what we see in 21 is this big picture about eternity. That's we get almost no details on here. Darn,
Be surprised.
but it's a big picture. At least you know, right? You do know enough. So do you see this segment division then? Details, big picture, details, big picture. Now, I actually got to thinking about it and looking at it a little bit more. Here it is. I kind of titled these a little bit. So let's just title these some. What was going on here in this first segment was a message to who? Message to the churches. And it was about things, and he called it in the segment division, the things that are. I'm just going to put what is, okay, to simplify it. Then what is the next part of this, which would go right here with this big picture part? Right. And in the outline, he says it's what? The things that will take place. Here is the message to the churches of what is. This is now, it shows heaven's throne first. And what must take place. Okay. Again, that is in line with in the spirit and in the spirit. So in a way, you could just take that line right out of there if you want. That'll make more sense to you. Okay. In the spirit, message to the churches, what is, what must take place. Then the next one is in the spirit, where we've got our details in that section. So for sure, 17 and 18, real clear to you what's going on. The judgment of Babylon, lots of detail, lots of burning, lots of people running, fire and brimstone and everything going really crazy. Then the next part is Jesus coming. He's on his white horse. What does he come for? For war, the great supper of God, where the birds of the air are called to do what? Eat the flesh of men. So in that one, what would you call that? Here it's a message to the church. Here it's the heavens saying what must take place. Now what is it? What do you see happening? The wrath of God, right? And who's it for? Yeah, those unbelievers, right? So this is about God's wrath for unbelievers. Okay, now that's that one. Let's do this one. This last one is, well, easy peasy now, right? Where are you? You in chapter 21 and 22. What is the major message there for us? It's yes, it's time to, yeah, as a matter of fact, he literally says in there, he who, in verse 7 of 21, he who overcomes will inherit these things. I will be his God. He will be my son. But for the cowardly, so now he's making a reference back to here, the cowardly, God's wrath is coming for them. The unbeliever, the cowardly, and it goes on to describe them as unbelieving, abominable, murderers, immoral persons, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars. Their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Then one of the seven angels had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues, came and spoke to me, saying, come, I'm going to show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great high mountain, and he showed me the holy city, the dwelling place of the bride. This is your inheritance. So here it's God's wrath. Here it's what? Yeah, but it's God's reward, right? And who is it for? For overcomers. That's the terminology they use. That's why I used it in that way. Okay. So can you see now that I broke that in the spirit one down several times actually this time, where before I got this part. Details, big picture, details, big picture. But this time I got this message to the church is what is heaven's throne and what must take place, God's wrath, what he's going to, how he's going to handle the unbeliever, and then God's reward for the overcomer. So again, more segment divisions. So those are our segment divisions. That's the layout. We didn't go into a lot on those lists, but we got about 5 minutes. Tell me, were there any questions you had that came out of your list making that we want to discuss right now? And by the way, did this chart that we sent out help you at all?
I got lots of emails that said, oh, yay.
Yay, okay. Oh, good. I'm glad. All right. Well,
I sent every email you told me I'm not going to send it as too much
because
extra
I
information.
know, and I had lost it too. Remember I had also lost it, so I was hemming and hawing on that one. But I looked back, and I had sent it out before the last time I taught. So I went ahead and said, okay, I'll do it, because I don't. Here's the thing for me as a teacher, I'm not trying to trick you up. I'm trying to actually make this simplified for you as much as I can without giving it away before you make your own discoveries. But sometimes for me, as when I'm learning, if you can just point me kind of in the right direction, when I get there, I can still go, oh, I see it now. I get it, right? But you have to have a little bit of nudging sometimes to get pointed, you know, like picking up a toddler and turning them in the right direction, and then they can walk forward. So I'm glad you got that one. Tell me what you saw in your list making. Any questions? Uh-huh. Yes. And then the city of God. Yes. Now those are. Yes. Yes. Very nice. Those are excellent contrasts. So what she just brought up there, those are things that when you get into your text, and if you can remember some of the things that she just said, you can go back in and do contrast and just put them in your observation along the side so that you notice them. They are very obvious as soon as they're pointed out to you. Go, oh yeah, for sure. Those are contrasts. They're contrasting these two personalities in here. Okay. We looked at the wrath. I thought that one was pretty simple. How did you see the wrath and the blood relating to one another? Did you see? Okay. Yes. And also, when the wrath is poured out, what is actually happening on the earth in many situations? Blood is occurring. Either the blood is used as their judgment, right? The wrath of God, like the seas become blood, the rivers become blood, or the moon becomes as blood, dark as blood. So symbolically, there's a picture, and then there are some literal things that will happen on the earth as well. So sometimes it's symbolic, sometimes it's whatever, or sometimes it's, I mean, it is a literal thing that the moon is going to turn to blood. We've heard of blood moons for years, right? But the fact that he's using a blood moon in this moment as a judgment is also a symbolic message about blood, right? Okay, so you might want to do a little more research there, but that's interesting. Any others?
I thought it was interesting that I actually went a little deeper. I always like the word studies. in all of those passages on wrath, there are actually two different reports.
Okay.
And one of them is more emphasizing the punishment aspect, whereas the other one emphasizes more the passion aspect.
Right.
The fierceness.
Right, right. Very
So
good.
that was interesting to see which verses.
Which one is speaking of? Is this speaking of the anger of God, or is this speaking the punishment quality?
When I did the word studies on it, I don't have it, but one of them has to do with like when straw catches on fire and it's consumed like. and
Ah,
there's that kind of.
some of them are,
That was the fierceness one because that talked about it's like boiling and there's an end to it.
I saw in the one where the souls are they're under the altar and they ask, how long, O Lord, will you refrain from avenging our blood? And of course he says, that's in that's the 5th seal, okay? In chapter 6, verse 11. I saw in there this restraint by God in a way. It's like, because we know if we're in the 6th seal, 5th or 6th seal at this point, we do have quite a bit coming ahead, but we know that throughout all history, these things have happened to these people. Their blood was shed simply because they named the name of Jesus, because that was their identity. And in identifying with Christ, many of them were killed, right? We see it even happening yet today, to this very day, it happens. In the days of this tribulation, it's going to continue. And that's one of the things he exhorts. He says, wait until what happens? The full number of those who are going to also shed their blood in the same way also. So you can see there's a restraint of God in what he's going to do there. But that God's judgment will be upon men who dwell on the earth at an appointed time. What I thought about was, isn't that interesting that he doesn't in the very moment deal with that aspect of avenging blood. And therefore there's going to be generations of men who were the executors of the souls, and they're still not yet judged, but there's going to be a day when he judges, he says. I just thought that the interesting thing of his restraint and the timing and the designated point, and there's an appointed time for it, that it's being withheld or delayed, I should say, although he says not long, because by the way, what happens right away then in the 6th seal? The 5th seal, he says, a little longer wait. Then what happens in the 6th seal? There's an earthquake. The sun became black and the whole moon became what? Like blood. So now that subject of blood comes up. We looked at that on my chart that I sent out to you. In these trumpets in particular, but he says, how long until you avenge our blood? So I marked it in red, you see here in that 5th seal. And he says, wait a little longer until the number of their fellow brethren be killed. There is a final conclusive statement. Now the blood has been avenged. And where does that happen? In chapter 17 or 18, I think it is, of where Babylon is judged. So where are we in the unfolding of things? The 7th bowl. Yeah. So we're all the way at the 7th bowl when he says, okay, now it's avenged. Now, I don't know that he's not avenging it through the whole thing, quite honestly, because there's a lot of things going on. We certainly see judgments. But in that final 7th bowl, that's when the totality of it really comes up. That's when the fierce anger, I'll bet the passion is really shown in that last bowl there.
Yeah, several times it has both words used.
Yes.
Where it says fierce wrath.
Fierce wrath.
In the Greek, it's actually both of those words.
Yes, very cool. Oh, I need to look on that. Okay, and then we see after he makes that statement, then in the 5th seal, he talks about in the 7th seal, he takes those prayers of those saints, the ones who just said, how long, O Lord? He mixes that fire from the altar before God. Now, this is where you need to understand the layout of the temple, what all these different parts were for. So they took the coals from the sacrificial altar, went to the altar of incense. They mixed the prayers with that, with incense. And then what did they do? Threw it to the earth, right? Prayers of the saints went before. Then what begins to happen? This trumpet sound. And what's the first thing? Blood. What's in the second angel? Blood. What's after that is still more, the rivers and the springs, it's more death, right? Dark, the sky becomes dark and the moon. So you begin to see this punishment concerning the blood that had been shed. And for sure, the first three really are clear, I think, indicators that blood is used symbolically to say, I understand about your blood and it will be fully avenged. And then he begins to show the blood qualities. Okay. Any others? Keywords? Earthquake, blood, wrath. Okay. So the point to it really is to kind of make a relationship. How did you see the relationship between the plagues and wrath? When is the word wrath really declaratively stated as being related to in this? Yeah. Okay, so it starts with these bowls, right? In chapter 16, the bowls being poured out, it makes it very clear that in the bowls is what? The wrath of God. So in that point, now we've hit the peak, the pinnacle of the power and the passion of God in this. And these bowls begin to be unfolded. When you see the word plague then come up, how does that relate? Well, in 15:1, the plagues are the wrath of, and in the plagues, the wrath of God is finished. And what are the plagues? They're also in the bowl. So it's like the bowl is the wrath and the plagues is the means through which God executes his wrath. So there is this coexisting or relationship between these two words of wrath and plagues. Yeah, the what and the how. That's a good way. Oh, you're so good. Thank you. The what and the how. Did you hear him? That was so simple. The what and the how concerning God's wrath. And if you just look at the list on them, it's fire, smoke, brimstone, the killing of men, plagues. Oh, this one was really good. When the 7 plagues were issued in 15:8, it says the temple was filled with the smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no one was able to enter the temple until the plagues were finished. So you're talking about right here at this third woe, and they're ready to pour these out. At this point, the temple in heaven is filled with smoke, and no one is allowed to enter into that temple until this is finished, right? Did you catch that? Does that remind you of anything? Okay, yes. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of verses you can go look up later. First one is Mark 15, verses 33 to 37. That's a New Testament one. And do you know what that one is pertaining to? The cross. And what happened when Jesus was on the cross? There were 3 hours, there was an earthquake, the veil rent, but there was darkness that fell on the earth for a period of 3 hours, right? From the 6th to the 9th hour, I think it says, right? Okay, so there's that part. Mark 15, 33 to 37. Now it's also in the other gospels too, but I just picked that one out.
Wasn't there when Moses went up on the mountain?
Thank you.
to see the-
Yes, you did good. Very good. You are sharp. Exodus 19, 21. Also Exodus 40, 34 and 35. Now there's more you can read before and after and all, but that'll give you also another thing to consider when you're thinking about this 7th trumpet, where God's temple now is filled with smoke, and he tells his angels, no one may enter until the wrath is finished. Why would that be? Yeah, so think on that.
Well, I was gonna say that, so at the end of, Jesus' work on the cross,
Yes.
Seventh bowl, the angel says that it's done.
Yeah. So there's smoke filled throughout here from his glory. I kind of think about the idea of what you were saying about the distinction between the words wrath, one being his fierce anger. And in this case, it talks about his wrath. He gives the wrath out, and the whole temple just fills with this smoke. And in that, what God says then is basically, leave. Do not come back into my presence until this is finished.
Sort of like what you're saying back on the mountain.
Yes.
When it was
Yes.
they got near, they were done.
Yes.
So God's saying, stay away from
Yes.
me now, because if you
Right
do
now.
me right now, you're gonna die.
Do not bother mommy right now, because I'm going to my room. Do not knock. Do not come in. Do not bother me until I cool down, right? Maybe, yes. The other thing is I've always thought about was the one where Jesus is on the cross and the darkness that fell. Kind of the same idea, isn't it, about the smoke or whatever? But I thought, what was the purpose of the darkness, and what was the issue that was being handled at that moment on the cross? It's when Jesus was bearing our sin, right? This is a moment when what's going to happen for 7 bowls? Judgment is being poured out on man for their sin. So, and Jesus was taking the wrath, but still darkness fell. And there was this moment where God did not look upon his son, and he cried out, "Why have you forsaken me?" Isn't that a beautiful picture? So the symbolic picture of the idea that here at this moment, that temple is filled with smoke, and he's saying, stay out until it's done. Yes. Yeah. All right. We did a good job. And see, we ended on time. Bye, you guys. Thank you, Kathy. Have a great day. You too, Holly.